Hey friends, Greg, host of the show here. So, recently I had to take my car to the dealership. There was a recall on the cooling system, and my aircon also started kind of misbehaving. That made me wonder. The car is fine, everything's great, and there's nothing wrong with it apart from, the driver seat squeaking a little bit, but that's just wear and tear. But because my aircon was out, I just felt like this should be covered by the warranty because that cools the battery as well. And that made me think, what about the maintenance of this car, beyond the statutory or whatever, the default that you get, when you buy the car? What if I wanted to be a bit more nerdy or just have somebody who has a bit more interest in things? Dealerships just offer you cookie cutter service because they're for people who mostly don't care. You just want to bring your car. It's like a utility, right? But I do care, and there's people who care around as well. So that reminded me of the time when I started driving EV. Can't remember exactly the date, but it was my first Kent EV meetup, and I ran into a person called Pete, who basically said to me, or maybe somebody actually referred me to him, saying, oh, he started this thing and he's a mechanic and he knows a lot about fixing electric cars. And my ear perked up. And, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking to Pete today, to Pete and Matt. And Pete started Hybrid Electric Vehicle Repair Alliance, Hevra, which is a UK and European organization that helps people with fixing their cars, after the warranty or sort of outside of the dealership network. And I thought, hang on, this issue that I'm having, how else would I be treated if I went to a Hevra garage instead of going to the Kia garage? Spoiler alert, the recalls can only be dealt with at the garage, and there's no cost to you as an owner, so there's just no issues. But the anything else, I think you might look into taking a car to a Hevra garage in the future instead of servicing it at a Kia garage or whatever dealership garage in the future. Just listen to this episode. You might find something you like and you might learn something. So, without further ado, here's Pete. Peter, I think we met at a meetup a while ago, like 2019 or 18. One of the Kent EV meetups. Way.
That's it, yeah. My name's Peter Melville, and I was the founder of Hevra about 6 years ago. And these days my job title is engineering director, so I'm in charge of anything technical to do with everything that we do, basically.
What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm Matt from Cedar Electric. So, we've got some car garages just doing all the run-of-the-mill normal stuff. And we do a lot of diagnostics on a lot of different manufacturers. So then we started the company Cedar Electric, where we're just doing electric vehicles and trying to get involved with some more in-depth repairs on the electric vehicles.
Okay, that's cool. So the first question that I have to ask is, why having independent garages fixing electric cars? Everyone tells me that electric cars are scary. They're iPads on the wheel, black boxes. You've heard it all, I'm sure. Can you demystify some of that stuff?
So if I go back to the beginning when it all started, my background is in fixing electrical problems on behalf of other garages, basically. So then when I bought an electric vehicle myself, I sort of had a foot in both camps, if you like. So I was familiar with garages and how they worked and what they were good at, what they struggled with, and all that sort of stuff. And equally, being an electric vehicle driver, I was speaking to other electric vehicle drivers, and I was aware of how things needed to look from that side. So Hevra, basically the idea was to combine these two things so that we could build something that was good for the garages and good for the drivers as well.
Okay, and it's not only just electric cars, it's obviously hybrids as well, although, we're all trying to push people to drive pure electric as much as we can.
Yeah, well, if I'm honest, I'm not the biggest fan of hybrids myself, but the reason that we cover hybrids as well is because there is a technical similarity. The high voltage systems, the braking systems and stuff you get on hybrids are very similar to what you get on electric. So they're a sort of great way of practicing, for want of a better word, building up your experience that is completely relevant to electric vehicles. It's a great way for garages to get return on investment rather than purely focusing on electric vehicles. And also, I think it's important as well. I think if you buy a hybrid car and nobody's able to fix it, I think that would be a problem for you then buying an electric car. You would, in your mind, you would think, I don't want to own an electric car because I've had a hybrid and nobody could fix it. Therefore, that would put me off, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
That's good. Yeah. Matt, so you guys are doing just electric cars, or is it hybrids as well?
Hybrids as well, yes. Yeah. So, in answer to your question, why we decided to do the electric cars, I suppose for us it's just natural progression, and we've always liked to. We do a lot of diagnostics on new cars as well, so always on the latest technology, and also we got a lot of technicians that are quite well skilled, and I think if they weren't doing electric cars, they probably wouldn't be that happy. So it's a natural progression that we need to stay with the technology movement of the motor industry. So we've started diving into it, and I think what's quite exciting about the independent doing electric vehicles is we can offer something to the dealer that's different repair, and it can often save quite a lot of money. And that's quite an exciting thing that I don't think we really got as much in the combustion engine world.
Okay.
Yeah, that's certainly a new avenue that's quite exciting.
So the myth of the car that cannot be fixed and is just an iPad on the wheels and a black box is obviously, that's not true, right? I mean, I don't have to say that to my audience, but I've got qualified people here to attest to that.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically, as I'm sure you and your audience know, mechanically they're relatively simple. There's far fewer moving parts than there are on a traditional car.
Yeah.
Obviously, in terms of the electronics, they are fairly complex. But I mean, the nice thing for us in garages and those of us who are fixing cars is, although electric vehicles are different, we've been gradually getting used to electronics on cars for the last 30 years or so. It's not like we've gone from a Citroen 2CV to a Tesla Model 3. We've had a very gradual transition in order to get used to the electronics and get familiar with testing it and repairing it and precautions and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I mean that's it. The cars had complicated electronics boxes and control modules for, I don't know, since probably 1990s. I would guess. Late 1990s?
Yeah, so it started off gradually with, you started having a computer for the engine, and then they started adding airbags and ABS, and then it got more and more so, and then they started joining them all together with networks. So it's been quite a gradual thing, and unfortunately not all garages have kept up, but for those who have, like Cedar, this is just the next step really in a path that we've been following for a long time.
Yeah. So, I mean, so speaking of Hevra, actually, I presume Cedar is part of the Hevra group, right? You've got the sticker.
Yeah, we've been there. As soon as we started electric, we joined Hevra straight away.
If I have anybody in my audience who, has been or is running a garage, or knows somebody who is running a garage, and they're kind of like, oh, I don't know about this electric stuff. It will take me out of business when I have to start looking at electric cars. What does the Hevra provide to an independent garage? Do you approach independent garages, or do they have to approach you? What does it look like? What is Hevra to like what I'm trying to say is basically it's like a two-pronged question. Like on one hand, you've got garage owners, and on the other hand, as a car owner, if I drive past a garage that has a Hevra sticker on it, I need to know what's happening. Like, why is that sticker there? What does it give me? Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. So when this all started, it was basically impossible to know if a garage was any good at fixing electric cars. So if you had one, it was, unless you knew sort of the right probing questions to ask a garage, it was very difficult to sort of know if it was in safe hands, if you like. And the Hevra was designed to fix that problem. So there are two sides to it, and this applies whether you're a garage or whether you're a customer, really. So the first side is the sort of customer-facing side of it, where we have the map on the website where you can find a garage in your area that's one of our members, and many of our garages have signs up and stuff like that. So that's the customer-facing side of it. Then the garage-facing side of it is essentially we aim to provide anything that the garage would need in order to do a good job on that car. So what that generally consists of is for the garage to sign up with us, they have to have an industry standard qualification. So that's typically a nationally recognised level 3 electric vehicle repair qualification. They also need to meet some other criteria to do with their business and tools and stuff like that. But the technical qualification is obviously somebody on site needs to hold that qualification. What we then do is we provide written documentation. So let's say you've gone away, you've done a training course. On the training course, they had a Nissan Leaf, for example. You learned all about that car. You got your certificate and everything else. You come back to your workshop, and customer brings in a Jaguar I-Pace, for example. That vehicle is very different to the vehicle that you did your training on, and our documentation effectively provides sort of a quick guide as to this is what you need to know about this particular car. So if you've got a job coming in the next day, you can sort of quickly have a look, right, what do I need to know about this car? How does the thermal management work? How are the motors and the wheels? And if it's a hybrid, how does the engine integrate with the motors and the wheels and everything else? Is there anything else that's particular to that car? Stuff like the electrical architecture networks and all that sort of stuff. So that obviously gives the individual technician a sort of head start in terms of repairing that vehicle. Then we also provide the garage with our technical support service. So let's say you're in that situation where you've done your training, you've got a car, and you've looked at the documentation for that car, but you're still not quite sure where to go next. The garage can then get in touch with us, and we'll then help that garage fix that car. And this is a really important part of it, because this is really important for the garages, because it's a real benefit to membership, having someone help them with that vehicle. It's a benefit to us, because this is how we learn how to focus our research and development. This is how we write our documentation, because we every time we do this, we learn a little bit more about that particular vehicle, that particular fault, or we might develop a new test specifically for that vehicle. And all that then goes out to help the rest of the network. And obviously the biggest benefit of all really is to the owner of the car, who gets their car fixed. Because in my previous job, where I used to go to garages and fix cars on a sort of individual basis, sometimes you would have a car that wasn't necessarily worth spending the time on. So you think, well, this job might turn out to be just a simple broken wire or something like that, but it's going to take me 5 hours to find out. And then after that 5 hours, it might turn out to be some really expensive part. And so often the owner of the car would say, oh, well, it's an old car. I don't think I'll bother. And one of the benefits of Hevra is that the first time we see a particular problem, we can put the effort in. We can go back and forth to that garage. We can do all the legwork and work out everything we need to know about that system. The garage can then do the tests and find what's wrong with the car. Once we've done all that hard work once, that information can then be shared across the network and effectively keep more cars on the road and keep more garages in work.
Yeah, but again, I've never worked actually for the. I've never worked as a mechanic, or I've got electrical engineering background, but so I understand. I understand how that works. But from my limited chats with different garages and OEM garages as well, is for a particular OEM like Kia or I don't know, or Ford, they would have that ability within the network, right? So if you bring your car to a Ford garage, they would be able to talk to somebody in Ford and have a documentation, obviously just for Ford cars. But they're kind of limited within that brand. Do you have access to all that stuff, or as well, or?
Yeah, so there's a legal requirement called the Motor Vehicle Block Exemption Order that effectively means manufacturers aren't allowed to provide preferential treatment to their own dealerships. In order to keep a level playing field in terms of competition, they have to make that information available to independent garages as well. So our members will be able to buy a service manual, a wiring diagram. All these things are obviously in electronic format these days, but they'll be able to buy those things from the manufacturer. And we find the information from the manufacturer sometimes is really good, sometimes is not so good. It's very, very rarely updated. So what they will do is a manufacturer will make a car, they will then make all the documentation for that car, and then that will be it forever generally. Whereas our documentation will evolve. So if we start to see that a particular fault becomes more common, we will actually alter our test plans and our documentation to say, well, actually check this first, because we've worked out through experience, this is the most likely fault. So check that first. And if that's okay, you can then go on to do some other tests and things like that. And that's a constantly evolving thing to improve it and upgrade it.
Okay. So Matt, sorry, like we've just been chatting here, but like, what is your experience with like electric cars, and what got you into fixing electric cars? Like, and how do you? Yeah, let's just start with that, and we can follow on from there.
Okay, what got us fixing electric cars? Well, I say just a natural progression. We're always trying to be at the top of our game, so we were never not going to go into electric cars. I suppose the question was when and how profitable was it going to be?
Yeah,
so that was the first thing we were going to start with, and so we started gently, should I say, and we had Hevra's support, because at the start, I suppose, right at the beginning, you are going into a little bit of an unknown. Sometimes you might not be as efficient as you'd like to be. But then we found it a really, really interesting and good industry, very enjoyable. And I think I just get excited about what you can save customers compared to. So there's so many instances where a customer might have an inverter or a battery fault, been to the dealer, but they only replaced the component. Whereas us ourselves and with Hevra support, we often will open up that component and repair it instead of replacing it. And, you can save, £5,000-10,000 sometimes for a customer, which also keeps a EV car on the road sometimes just for an economical repair. So that's something exciting that can be really good. So that's probably why we keep doing it, I'd say. And there's, so much more that can be done that the main dealers don't as such. So yeah,
I heard about the legislation that you mentioned, or the law that you mentioned, Pete, but I didn't know what it's called off the top of my head. I wouldn't remember. I'm sure you have to explain that to people all the time. How does the maintenance of ICE car or internal combustion car compare to EV from your perspective as an independent garage? Is it just the same? Because you have access to like all the parts and documentation, or is it simpler? Obviously the worry is that this is what I've heard from some of the garages that I went to in the past. Is now that people are going to drive electric, they're going to go out of business because the people just won't turn up because the cars are much more reliable. But apart from that, once the car turns up and there's something wrong with it, how does it compare to fixing a nice car?
So in terms of I suppose servicing side of it, yes, you're going to do less. So if you were to a garage that only done servicing, you might struggle a bit. But I don't think there's any less work as such. Overall, I think you just got to be a bit more dynamic and more versatile and do more stuff on vehicles than you're probably used to. I think certainly what I've noticed is labour times are probably higher on some of these cars when you're doing extensive repairs. But yeah, the servicing costs, Pete, you'd agree, is a lot less on EV cars, especially the time to do it and the parts required is less. But yeah, one thing obviously you do need to bear in mind is that you're carrying out whereas on ICE cars, a lot of time, once they've been out of warranty of 3 years, you might have done an interim service or a major service or a full service, whatever. Sometimes the garage would almost make their own service package. Whereas what we find with EV cars is we're always doing OEM service, manufacturer servicing, following the sheet, because a lot of these batteries have got 8-year warranties. So we're making sure we always follow the manufacturer guideline to the service. That's probably a big shift in doing an EV service from an ICE engine service. But in terms of can you do it? Yeah, of course you can, as long as you're geared up to do it.
Yeah, this is skipping some questions that I have on the list, but you mentioned a very good point that people always ask about is, if I buy a brand new, I don't know, Kia e-Niro today, they will sell you a 3-year servicing plan, which is like £700 or £800 or something, ridiculously high. Can I just bring the car to an independent garage and keep my warranty, or are there any restrictions on that?
No, as long as they're carrying out the exact service sheet per the manufacturer, then there's no problem there. Sometimes they do ask for a battery evaluation, which you might need to use a dealer tool for. But as long as you've got that, which we do, then it's not a problem. I suppose sometimes you might maybe not have the tooling, and that would be a shift for the garage. You'd need to invest in some tooling, but the tooling's always available. But if you were to buy every tool for every manufacturer, it might be whether it's cost effective. I suppose it depends on what your business is and why you do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put anybody on the spot because obviously there's just so many variants and so many possibilities. I'm sure there's there's loads of good stories and some bad stories, like with everything. The other question that I always hear is but if I service my car with an independent garage and I have a warranty claim after 3 years or 4 years on my powertrain and the battery, can OEM actually say, no, it's been serviced incorrectly by, Joe in Tunbridge or,
No, as long as you're, following the manufacturer service sheet. So we always print that off and follow it to the point, and are using OEM parts or the equivalent to. Then as long as you're carrying out that, I can't see any problem. Would you agree with that, Pete?
Yeah. So that this is covered by the motor vehicle block exemption order that I mentioned, and you can have your car maintained by an independent without invalidating the warranty. And actually, if something fails that's covered by the warranty and the manufacturer refuses the claim, if it did end up going to court and all that sort of stuff, the manufacturer actually has to prove that it was down to incorrect maintenance that the fault occurred. So let's say, for example, you went to an independent garage and they did something wrong on your service, and then a year later your windscreen wiper motor failed. They would have to prove that the windscreen wiper motor failed because of what was done wrong on the service. Even if it was clear that the service had been done wrong, it would have to be a direct cause of that for them to invalidate the warranty on that component.
I mean, just to be clear, I haven't heard of anybody who's been refused for that reason. It's just a purely hypothetical question, but it's a question that people will ask and do ask. With my leasing plan that I had on the car, I had to go to the Kia. I mean, it was part of the package, so it was prepaid. So I didn't have to go there, but it was already paid for, so it just kind of makes sense.
that's an important thing to point out with if the car's leased, is that sometimes, and it's worth checking the paperwork, sometimes the leasing company will actually specify that they want it to be serviced by a main dealer or something like that. And at the end of the day, although it's nothing to do with the warranty, but at the end of the day, it's their car. So under the terms of your lease, you may find that there are things like that in place. But if it's your car and it's the warranty you're concerned about, then there's no issues.
You hear in the media all the time that, electric cars, we're going to have to replace the batteries in them and then give X number of years on them. But, there are cars that are like 10 years old, like Model S's, some of them. The other one is Nissan Leaf. That's, especially the 24 and 30 kilowatt hour models. The batteries were Nissan made some engineering choices, but let's just put it this way, or business choices, that I don't think paid out worked out very well for those batteries. So have you had anybody in a 10-year-old Model S turning up and saying, can you replace me the whole battery, or a battery warning light comes on and Tesla told me it's going to be $8,000, or buy a new car? And you could, any stories to that effect that you can talk about?
Yeah, I think there's two separate things here. So there's basically two things that can go wrong with a battery. One of them is a fault, in which case, your car works perfectly one day and then the next day doesn't work. And the other one is degradation, which the car still works, but every year when you do your holiday and you do your long drive, you realise you have to stop a little bit sooner because the battery's degrading. Faults we can generally fix. So the Tesla Model S you mentioned, we didn't used to be able to repair those batteries, but now we can. There's something that we've worked on, and we've worked out how to repair them, and we've repaired a few of those. Again, we've repaired various other batteries where things such as the circuit boards and the contactors and things other than the cells inside the battery pack have failed, and we can open that up, we can do the repair, we can reseal it, and get that battery back in the car. In terms of degradation, it depends exactly what's happened, really. So sometimes we'll find that one cell has particularly degraded and the rest of the pack is in relatively good, even if it's not as new, but is in relatively good condition. And in that situation, we can take that battery apart, we can replace that cell, and we can get the car back on the road. The other thing that we do sometimes find is sometimes all of the cells have just degraded a little bit, and obviously the only solution to that really is to replace all of the cells, which is a more expensive thing. To be honest, that is a harder thing to fix in terms of being able to fix it within the customer's budget. But I mean, to be honest, generally speaking, what's happened is there's enough demand for cars that do short journeys that people just tend to change the use of the car, so that a car that perhaps was someone's main car 10 years ago is now someone else's car just for taking the kids to school and popping to the shops. Car, it's 10 years old, sort of thing. But battery replacement is certainly something that we can do, but most people find it's not the best option for them. Most people just will decide to change what they use the car for, or get a different car.
Matt, do you have any experience with any people coming with super old Model S's or Nissan Leafs that where the cell fails?
Yeah, so Nissan Leafs, the 24 kilowatts, we've upgraded quite a few cars to the 40 kilowatt. So there's a conversion kit that enables that. That takes their range up to about 170 miles, so it's quite good. But that's quite an expensive repair, and that's, Pete, where it has degraded, isn't it? And then a repair isn't viable on that 24.
What's nice with that is the customer is paying quite a lot of money, but they're actually getting a car that's better than it was when it was new, aren't they?
Yeah. So a few scenarios where that's happened is often they've weighed up a 40 kilowatt hour Leaf and thought, I'm happy with my car. It's very clean, very tidy. It's been MOT. There's no advisories. I'd rather just put a 40 kilowatt hour battery in it, save some money. And then their 24 kilowatt hour battery, they might use for other sources, a Powerwall and stuff, or try and sell it on and recoup some money. So that's obviously quite a viable solution for that. The 30 kilowatt hours, we've done some cells, haven't we, and fixed them on the 30 kilowatt hour Leafs. That seems to be fairly common, doesn't it, for the middle cells at the back to fail. With the Teslas, I don't know. I haven't. I've done quite a few repairs on Model S batteries now. I haven't come across a degraded one yet, Pete. Have you? I've just come across failed ones more than.
I've not seen one that's excessively degraded. No, it's purely been repairs on those.
Yeah, and we've managed to do some different repairs on them. And I think even the cheapest one was about £2,600 or something to do a repair on the whole battery, which is not mega money. So, yeah, and again, that's a good thing about being with Hevra and independent, because with Tesla, it's obviously a new battery, which is around 15 grand, I think, isn't it? Something like that. So, yeah, quite a saving there. So, yeah, there's definitely options. But, yeah, I think, I don't know what you think, people. I think the early technology degrades, and I don't know if we're going to see the same in the technology we've got out at the moment in 10 years' time. I don't know if we're going to see that.
The faults we're seeing on cars that are 10 years old now, we won't necessarily see on cars that are new now in 10 years' time, because obviously the technology is improving fairly quickly. The biggest changes in terms of battery degradation, the biggest things that appear to affect it is what sort of cooling system the battery has, and what sort of charge and discharge rates the battery sees. And if you double the size of the battery, it can do the same amount of work with half the effort, if that makes sense. Therefore, if you have two cars that are the same and one of them the battery is twice the size, that battery is working, that battery is putting in a lot less effort. So, if you take, for example, a Volkswagen e-Golf, and then you take the Golf GTE, which is the same car, but it's a plug-in hybrid rather than a full electric, you could drive both of those cars at 30 miles an hour, and the e-Golf is barely breaking a sweat, and the GTE is going as hard as it can, because that is as much as that battery can put out. And obviously, over the last 10 years, EV batteries have got a lot bigger. Therefore, the effective load on them, what we call the C rate, the charge and discharge rates, have effectively become less effort for the batteries. The other thing I mentioned is the cooling system. So 10 years ago, there were quite a few cars around that didn't have any battery cooling system at all. So the Nissan Leaf is one of them, the e-Golf is another, and some of the Peugeot Citroën models didn't have any cooling on them. And then some cars had air cooling, where it would just take air from inside the car and blow it through the pack. Air cooling has virtually disappeared, because it means you need to leave space in the battery for the air to circulate. So in order to fit a bigger battery in the car, they had to get rid of all the airspace. So liquid cooling is by far the most common type now. And with the benefit of hindsight, we can look back at the Tesla Model S we mentioned, which we haven't particularly seen high levels of degradation, and we can say, well, actually they were liquid cooled and it was a large capacity, which is the format that other manufacturers in the main are now following.
And just to clarify or kind of extend to what you said, Pete, is it's not the whole pack that has to work less. It's individual cells basically have less discharge, which translates to the whole thing just being sitting there, just being twiddling their thumbs when you're driving 30 miles an hour, or sometimes just being recharged if you drive down the road. Given that EVs typically require far less maintenance than ICE cars, which I think we all have to agree on, could you speak about or enumerate all the key things that you still think needs like regular inspection and upkeep? Things that a typical owner of an EV has to think about compared to ICE car.
Okay, if you are servicing an ICE car, you'll have various things that you need to change, like the filters for the engine and stuff like that, and then you'll have lots of checks as well. So a lot of the things on an ICE car service are just checks. And on an electric vehicle, basically you don't have so many things that need to be changed, but you still have most of the things that need to be checked. So, certainly you want to check your tyres, brakes, suspension and steering. The brakes are particularly a thing to keep an eye on with electric vehicles, because as we all know that regenerative braking can do a lot of the braking for us. Therefore, we don't have the brake pads cleaning the discs as we would have done in the old days with a traditional sort of automatic car where you're sort of on the brake all the time. And equally, the brakes don't get as hot, so that means it doesn't boil off the moisture. So corrosion on the brakes can be a little bit of a factor. It's not a major issue, but it's something that's certainly worth checking every service and acting on if you do find an issue. So in terms of the chassis checks, would you agree, Matt? It's basically tyres, brakes, suspension, steering.
Yeah. On the EV stuff, with the weight of the battery, you tend to get a lot more issues with wheel alignment, which seems to be part of the service schedules on EV cars, where it wasn't on ICE engines. It's more of a check wheel alignment, which is quite important, especially when you're getting abnormal tyre wear and going through tyres when you don't need to.
Do EVs actually have a beefier? I mean, they probably have a beefier suspension, right? Does that help with the wheel alignment, or just makes it worse?
I think, it's designed differently, isn't it, to hold that weight? And obviously the shift on acceleration, deceleration, and the actual amount of acceleration, deceleration, there's a lot more stress on your suspension and bushes and tyres.
And I think a lot of electric vehicles that are on the market now, and certainly the older ones, are based on existing petrol and diesel cars. And whilst certain things have been upgraded and things like that, they perhaps haven't been upgraded as much as they should have done. But you'll get certain vehicles with an ICE engine and you'll get the same thing with an electric vehicle. And the electric vehicle, the suspension will wear out at a slightly faster rate just because there's a bit more load on it.
Okay. So if you buy a new EV, perhaps look for ones that were purposely designed from ground up to be an EV rather than I think they call them multi-energy platforms.
And I think sometimes as well, it's a fact that you tend to notice these things more. So, for example, when you think about wheel alignment, if you're going down the road with your wheels like this, yes, it's going to wear your tyres out, but also it might have a noticeable effect on your range because obviously they're not rolling as efficiently as they would do if they were in a straight line. And, things like suspension and things like that, a tiny little noise you might not have noticed if you had a great big diesel engine sort of masking that noise. But when you have a car that's much quieter, you do tend to notice little noises and things. And to be honest, that can only really be a good thing for road safety because it means these sorts of issues will get noticed sooner. But moving on to the other parts of the service, it gets sort of slightly vehicle specific after this point, but whatever sort of cooling systems and things like that the car has, it's worth doing a check because, some vehicles like that, there's a particular hybrid vehicle that's made by a well-known German manufacturer. And basically, if you have a coolant pipe split, then it will cook the inverter in that car. And that will result in a very expensive repair. So whilst you can't pre-plan for everything, road conditions and stuff like that, it's worth looking at that sort of thing for a service to say, oh, actually, we can replace this pipe that's £25 plus a bit of labour and a bit of coolant, rather than having a much, much more expensive repair later down the line when something's actually overheated. There are some vehicle-specific services as well. So there's some other hybrid vehicles we've seen as well where... because on an electric vehicle, as you know, the battery is normally under the floor and takes up most of the floor of the car. Yeah. On a hybrid, the battery is much smaller and it normally fits in the boot area. And we have seen certain models where the sunroof drains block up. And then because the water can't run out the bottom of the car in the normal way, the water will sort of gradually fill up the boot area. And, of course, that's where the hybrid battery is. So you then start getting sort of issues like that. And those sorts of things can be prevented to a certain extent, because when you get the car in for a service, you can make sure the sunroof drains are clear, get rid of any leaves and debris that might then later down the line cause that sort of expensive issue. So it's certainly worth keeping on top of these things. Interesting.
Yeah. Any stories like that, Matt?
Yeah, I literally written down roof drains here because it is on the manufacturer servicing to unblock them. Another thing I was going to say, Pete, with the cooling is the air conditioning servicing is quite important because some of the batteries are air conditioning cooled. And I found that you can have no gas in the system and you don't even get a warning. It's fine. I don't know why they don't warn you that your aircon system's low.
Yes, I've noticed that on a few vehicles. Something that's quite critical to the operation of the vehicle doesn't give the driver any indication that it's gone wrong. And that's obviously the manufacturer's decision to make it that way. But that's another reason why these things need checking. And also, if you suspect there's an issue with your car, it could be nothing, but it's worth getting it checked out before it becomes a bigger problem.
Yeah, especially when the air conditioning's cooling your battery and it's not doing a very good job and you don't even know.
It's funny. It's funny that you mentioned that because my car was literally in service yesterday on the recall of the battery coolant. in early Kias, they put in wrong coolant or the wrong type of coolant that could have calcified, or whatever the word is. There could have been some basically stone chips or whatever, or bits of, what's the word that I'm looking for? Calcification? No.
It sort of, crystallizes, and
crystallizes.
Then that restricts the flow. Yeah. That vehicle's got quite a clever feature on it, actually, because it monitors the speed of the coolant pumps. And if this speed is too high, it knows that there's a circulation issue, because obviously if you imagine pumping something by hand, if it doesn't involve any effort at all, then
it's just there, basically.
That's a warning sign, and the car will actually spot that. So that one's better than most in detecting.
Mm-hmm. I had a warning once on the dashboard in that car, saying something about the coolant. Please stop driving. 10 of the car stopped, and when I turned it back on again, everything was fine. The warning just went away. And I knew that the car was going to have to go to the garage because of that recall. But oddly enough, a couple of weeks after that, the aircon started making, and I quote literally my wife here, making a Darth Vader noises. So the recall yesterday obviously was free because it was covered under warranty. But I had to pay £220 something for regassing of the aircon, because that obviously failed as well, and that's not covered under warranty.
That's considered wear and tear. Yes.
Yeah, it was. They said there was only 370 grams of gas, and it's supposed to be 1,000 something. And I was like, okay, well, surely that system is connected to the battery cooling system somehow. I presume. I mean, you probably know much better than I do, but I presume so, because there is no separate air cooling circuitry in that car, as far as I know. So I was kind of hoping that it's going to be covered under warranty. But just going back to that question, actually, just out of my pure interest, if I was to bring that car to a Hevra garage and say, "Can you fix this recall under yourself, rather than me bringing it to a Kia garage?" Is that possible as well, or does that have to be handled by a garage?
No, that would need to be done by an agent of the manufacturer, because there's no not for any technical reason, but there's no system in place for an independent garage to be reimbursed, or for the right records to be kept on recalls that have been done and stuff like that. So that would need to be done by a dealership.
I mean, that's free of charge to the owner of the car anyway. So obviously there's no harm that way. But I'm sure, well, hopefully this will improve at some point, because I think I had to wait about a month and a half for them to see me, because it's a procedure that takes an entire day, apparently. And the guy explained to me in details why, but I'm not going to trying to repeat what he was saying, but basically manufacturer says this should take 2 hours, and in practice they found out they need to take much longer to actually do this properly. So just going back to the question that I have here, and again, I have quite a few, so we're probably not going to get through all of them. If somebody buys a used EV, obviously with a nice car, you can go to any garage and they'll check it, especially if you have somebody trusted. With EVs, again, everyone's kind of worried that it's a black box, and how do you assess the battery's state of health and the rest of the system? Is that something you see a lot of people bringing their EVs that they want to buy on secondhand markets from somebody, and they ask you, can you plug that in and see what's wrong with it, or have a look? Have you seen a lot of that? And what sort of advice would you give to somebody buying a secondhand car?
No, I haven't had people asking for state of health of a battery unless the battery's been faulty. And the only other time we've measured state of health of a battery is when we're buying a battery to put in a vehicle. I haven't really come across it in that sense. I think it's often something I think would be good to know that figure before you buy a car. So I don't know if it's something that will happen where used car dealers advertise the car with a state of health of the battery. It's definitely worthwhile. But yeah, not something I've really been asked for as such.
Okay. I mean, it seems like most people just buy people are on one hand worried about buying secondhand cars because they're worried about, what they're going to buy. Will it last, basically? And all this, especially lately you hear all the nonsense in the press that's probably based on 10 examples in the whole world, and prepaid by wealthy companies that are afraid of losing the market. But the second thing is that new cars, obviously the technology still progresses enough. New cars are very it's just tempting to have the latest car because it will have a better range, servicing, and all that stuff. So perhaps we're in early days of second-hand EV ownership. I tend to keep my cars more than. So my car is now more than 3 years old, and we're probably going to keep it for another 2 years at least. Because there's nothing wrong with it. It still has the same range as it had when it was brand new. And according to the ODB2 dongle, at least, the state of health is still 100%. Although I'm not entirely sure how much I trust that assessment. But it has to be said, it's a way better car than my first EV, which was a 30 kilowatt hour Leaf when it comes to battery technology. So I don't know what else I could say to people who are willing to buy a second-hand EV and want to be kind of certain that it's not going to go bad in a year or two.
I think EVs are very reliable compared to how many we see faulty compared to how many are on the road. I don't know what you think, Pete. But also, I think what happens is, ICE cars have been out for such a long time, and you get a diesel with a 40 DPF, and it's kind of, we've normalised to it, and it's not frowned upon. It's just part of owning a car, and you replace the brakes and you replace everything else that goes with it. And the actual cost of owning an EV car in terms of maintenance is going to be a lot cheaper than an ICE car for sure. And I think with less problems personally. So I don't know why you would be scared of making a change for that sense. I definitely don't think the cost of owning an EV car is more than an ICE car. That's for sure.
But I'm sure somebody,
right. I think you're right, and I think also if you, if you buy it from a legitimate place that's selling it, you'll have certain buyer protections in place. It's sort of minimum 3-month warranty and all this sort of stuff. So I think, it's just a case of making sure you're happy with the car, and then if you buy it and the worst does happen, then you can take it back and get it sorted or refunded. So,
but I'm sure if somebody turned up with a used EV and said, "Could you give it have a look and tell me, if there's anything wrong with that car?" I'm sure you can do that for them as well, right? For an independent garage to do that. I'm always trying to encourage people to kind of go into a field of engineering or anything engineering related. In a similar vein, somebody actually asked me legitimately this question. It wasn't me just putting that in, as I usually do. So if anyone's pursuing a career in EV maintenance, what sort of skills, knowledge areas would you recommend they focus on during their training? And do they have to, presumably if somebody's starting to, wants to be a mechanic now, it's just, EV maintenance is like a given skill, but, I still have to ask.
So our apprentices at the minute just go through the normal apprenticeship like they would have done 4 or 5 years ago, but enrolled in their apprenticeship they do come out with a level 2 and 3 EV qualification at the end of it as well. And I think it's still important with an EV car, you've still got your rolling chassis, your comfort electronics inside, everything that's still the same as an ICE car. And especially when you do work on EV cars and you're working on hybrids, you still need to know how an engine works. So I think a normal apprenticeship is still the right way to go. I'd probably just make sure you're working within a garage that is willingly taking on EV cars and not pushing them away, because that's obviously what's going to leave you behind is the hands-on experience in the garage. So as long as you're working with a garage that's moving forwards, then the apprenticeship role should cover exactly what you need. Okay.
Do you have any people, approaching you with this sort of question, Peter?
Yeah, we do, and I would like to see a ground-up EV training course, to be honest, where you can come into it with no experience of cars and learn everything that you need to know. And unfortunately, at the moment, that isn't really the case. At the moment, if you want to get into it, you basically have to learn about petrol and diesel cars and then sort of do the electric bit on the end. And I think, although we're involved in it every day, you have to remember as part of the bigger picture, we're still relatively early days. And I think hopefully that will change over time. I think the way things may possibly develop is that in the future we'll have, for want of a better word, a sort of chassis technician who deals with the brake, suspension, steering, tyres, and all that sort of stuff. And then we'll have a different type of technician who will deal with things like the high voltage systems, the networks, the thermal management systems. So one will deal with the sort of more sort of physical type of work, and the other one with the more sort of thinking and investigating type work. But again, I think that's something for the future, that once things are much more mainstream and the majority of cars in garages are electric.
That's interesting. I mean, it kind of does make sense. One thing that I noticed, with ICE cars, like you, Matt, mentioned, they've been around for such a long time. Everything's a bit of a normal thing. But there's also, I don't know, at least to me, most of these cars seem to be very similar in nature. Like, there isn't, if you strip away the chassis and like the colors and an interior, I think ICE cars are cheaper to manufacture because probably there's like 3 companies in the world that make engine blocks and most of the components, and OEM manufacturers just kind of just slap it together and add a bit of the flavor to it. Whereas with my feeling is with electric cars, it's still early days, and there's still way more variation between models and makes. This is just my pure speculation, pretty much, because I have zero experience taking cars apart and comparing them. Would you agree with that speculation? And if you do, given the variety of them, does that make your life way more difficult as an independent garage?
I would agree with you. There's much more variety, and I think that's always something that happens with a bit of new technology. Different manufacturers try different things, and then eventually they sort of start converging on the things that are the best mix of the various compromises, if you like. Because if you go back about 20 years, when sort of diesel started becoming popular, Matt, you'll probably remember this. You sort of had the common rail, and you had the pump doos, and then you had the sort of electronic injection pump types. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because obviously that's not what we're talking about. But it's just an example of how we had a variety of different technologies, and then eventually they sort of converged, and they all just started making basically the same. And I think you're right with electric vehicles. We've seen far more variety, and I think, to be honest, from a technician's point of view, it makes it much, much more interesting to have a variety of different types of systems, but it can catch you off guard a little bit. And this is partly why we have the vehicle guides that I mentioned earlier, to explain the differences between every car, because there are a lot of them, and it can potentially catch you out if you're not familiar with how something works. I think going forward, it's actually something that we'll probably see a bit less of, because we're starting to see certain things like the way manufacturers measure the voltages of the individual cells, the way the manufacturers cool the batteries. There used to be more of a variety, and you can see that the manufacturers are tending to pick the ones that are preferable for various reasons, and the other ones are starting to disappear. So I think it's only a matter of time before they all become a bit more similar, even if they're very different in terms of their appearance and their features and things. I think in terms of the technical stuff, they will get a lot more similar. But
yeah. Okay. And I'm sure that's going to lower the manufacturing costs as well massively, right?
If you can absolutely. If you look at the complexity of a modern ICE car, the only reason they're cheap is because they make so many of them. Like, if you wanted to make one in your shed, it would take you forever. But
but bonus question before we finish, if you had to say or pick one or two things that would make EV manufacturing, EV maintenance, not manufacturing, way easier for you, what would it be? Like, if you could talk to all of the OEMs and say, just do this 1, 2, 3 things, and our lives will be way easier, what would it be?
One thing we sometimes find difficult, that if anything has actually become harder since working on ICE vehicles, is that sometimes you'll want to measure a particular voltage or something, and you can't get to the bit you need to get to. And of course, you can take it all apart, but then you can't measure what you want it to measure because you want to measure it while it's operating.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have to factor in things like water tightness and safety and things like this. But maybe a few more windows where we could get into would be one. If I'm allowed to have another one as well, one thing that's a lot easier is Tesla. The way you program new components, because generally, when you fit a new component on a vehicle, you'll need to program it to the car to make sure it's on the right software level at the same with the car. Not just Tesla, but all vehicles, and not just EV, actually, ICE as well. You'll fit a new component and you'll need to program it to make sure it's at the same software level and it's matched to the other components in the car or whatever it is for that particular part. And Tesla have actually made that process a lot slicker than most other manufacturers. And I personally would like to see other manufacturers follow.
What about you, Matt?
Don't know. It's hard. I suppose if you were doing one manufacturer, your life would be quite easy, I think, because you can get on board with how they do things, get the right tooling and that. When you're covering a high range of manufacturers, often it's the tooling that's the restriction. So you need to invest in a lot of different tooling sometimes. And even just things like servicing, sometimes you just need a dealer tool to do a battery evaluation sometimes, and I wish there was maybe a more like OBD read that was generic for all vehicles.
More standardised.
Exactly, yeah. That would make life a bit easier in that sense. Because I think it should be in interest to do so a bit, because I think there's always going to be independents that need to service these cars. So it's, for the servicing side of it, I think it should be made fairly easy, because you want to make EV owners experiencing easier than having to be restricted and find a garage that can't do it, and etc. So,
okay, so just OEMs open up your data, basically, give better access to independent garages.
They give you access. It's just the investment to do it sometimes.
And unify your tools, basically, or yeah. I suppose once the components are a bit more common and the same or similar, it might be easier then. I don't know, but I'm trying to put a hopeful thread in there.
Yeah.
All right. I think that one thing that will get easier is the cars are being made in far greater numbers now. Especially when you consider, like, if you look at the Peugeot Citroën range, for example, you've got small cars, bigger cars, vans, and everything that all have very similar powertrains. And I think things like that, once, certainly from our point of view, if we want to repair inverters and onboard chargers and things like that, once we've got our head around one particular one, then that's going to have so many applications, which I think has been a struggle for remanufacturing in the past, because in the grand scheme of things, some of these vehicles, there aren't that many on the roads, so that should improve. The more cars are on the road, the more of a market there is for remanufacturing and stuff.
And another thing I think that should be improved in general, don't you think, Pete, is just the charging network to help EV drivers a bit. I think the manufacturers are making amazing cars, coming up with these, like, they must be investing so much money and coming up with these really slick, great cars, and then sometimes stuff they haven't got control of, the charging network out of their system lets it down a bit sometimes, and it's a shame because, that's something they haven't got control of. But
yeah, I mean that's the downside of having a model like most OEMs do compared to Tesla, where they control everything: the car, the charging network, and the software as well on both ends, so they can make that experience much slicker. But I mean, put it this way: compared to what it used to be like when I started driving EVs at the late 2015, I can comfortably drive now my car. I mean, my car I can jump into it and drive basically to Yorkshire without having to stop for like 4.5 hours, and and still have about 10% of the battery left. Like back in the day when I had the Nissan Leaf 30 kWh, it was a bit harder, and 4 kWh before that I had on loan. It was hard to drive that car, to a pub in Sussex and back home. without having to recharge on the way back.
Yeah.
So there's some horror stories that I hear about charging networks where, especially at peak times when people have to queue and all that. But there's just way more chargers now available. So I always tell people just stop more often. Don't go to the places everybody else is going to, and you'll be fine. But yeah, there's still loads that needs to be improved, but I think we're still in early days. Thank you guys for your time, first of all. But if you can plug in yourself and, where people can find you, and how people can get a hold of you if they have more questions or more, or they're in the industry, they want to talk to you about anything.
Yeah, so if you're interested in any more information about Hevra, you can visit our website, which is www.hevra.org.uk, or if you're outside the UK, it's hevra.eu. And all the garages on there, we've made sure they're qualified, and we provide them with our technical support and share experiences across the network.
Yeah, so if you do want to get in contact, obviously you can go through our website, Cedar Electric, or our social media. We're always at the end of that, which is also Cedar Electric. And then that's probably the best way to contact us, really, or email me at matt@cedarelectric.co.uk.
Cool. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.